Zach Osterman from the Indy Star joins us now. Zach, how are you, sir?
I'm good. How about you?
Still recuperating from Vegas, man, and ready to go to Kansas, and then hopefully a little break after that. But Indiana getting one right now of sorts. It's finals week, so no games this week, but studying. And as they get prepared to play the Jayhawks on the road this Saturday, which will be, I'm guessing, the most difficult environment any player on that team has ever played in.
Maybe. Mackey's pretty tough. To be fair, Fog Allen obviously has the prestige factor that I think Assembly Hall tends to have as well, and I don't think
doesn't it hold like 16,000?
Is there anybody? Race Thompson was on the team. I guess I don't think he made the trip when they went to Cameron. I think that was his concussion season. I think he was still in concussion protocol. Maybe I'm wrong. So I don't know that any of these guys went to Cameron Indoor. But, listen, I do think in terms of hostility, in terms of intensity, when particularly when you're Indiana, there's probably nothing worse than Mackey Arena. So, if they're looking for comparisons to.
Yeah, it's just I was going probably on the fact that it's just a little bit bigger. And really, it's not that much bigger. What's it hold? Like 16,000 as compared to 14,000 for Mackey, I think, something like that. So, but and you get the aspect of having an Indiana team coming in for the first time, a so-called brethren blue blood that they definitely are going to want to show out for, because it's not Iowa State coming or just any old team. This is a fellow blue blood coming in, so they are definitely going to want to get their licks in, because they have to come back to Bloomington the following year. I'm trying to find what the actual I can't believe it didn't pop up, but Allen Fieldhouse, what the capacity. There you go. Where's the capacity? Why don't you just show me what the capacity is and tell me instead of making me ask? Allen Fieldhouse was built with a capacity of 17,000 during Ted Owens' coaching period in the early mid-60s, 60s to the 80s. The capacity was reduced to 15 to improve fire code mandated blah, blah. It was raised to 15.8 in the 86 season. And since 93, its official capacity has been 16.3. Of those seats, 4,000 are dedicated to students, with most of the remainder taken by season ticket holding members of William Education Fund. So there you go. That's so you've got about 12,000 people, and that's where the Indiana fans will be able to try to get their tickets through. 4,000 students there. I believe Indiana has approximately, if it's the same, around 7,000 students, just to compare that to at their games, which is another reason, again, that they should take and disperse those students in a different manner. They have the biggest student population in college basketball, and they used to brag about that, but they don't use it to their advantage. So we'll see. I can't remember how exactly the Fog is set up with their students and whatnot.
I know they have theirs. They have theirs in the end zones, if I'm not mistaken.
On both end zones. Well, and that would, you know what? That probably makes sense. About 4,000. That would be a couple thousand each. Yeah, Zach, I was just talking about the Fog holds about 16,000. So we're looking at similar size, a little bit bigger than Mackey, a little bit smaller than Assembly Hall, but it's how it's built. I think it's really old. I mean, this thing is old, but the tradition that you talked about, it's just going to be a great environment for this team when tournament play comes around, because this is the type of environments they're going to have to play through, actually in conference as well.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think there's a real value to
Indiana being in these games. I think, ultimately, and I'm not trying to, I'm using the Crossroads Classic as the example because that's what would have been on the schedule today, this weekend, if not for the trip to Kansas. I'm not picking on the Crossroads Classic over something else. But from a recruiting standpoint, if you're Mike Woodson, you had all 30 teams in the building for the UNC game. I'd be shocked if you didn't have all 30 NBA teams in the building for the game in Vegas.
This would be the third time, right?
I'd be very surprised if you didn't have all 30 teams in the building for this game this weekend. If you want to really dig down into it even more, the reality is, and I'm sure that this wasn't necessarily the reason these games were scheduled, but it is something that I would bet you Mike Woodson brings up in some shape or form. It's not just that you got all 30 teams in the building. It's that they probably sent three different scouts to each game. So every team is getting a long evaluation of your players because the scout that will come down for a game in Bloomington is not the scout in all likelihood that will go to the game in Vegas. And the same thing, I would guess, with the game in Kansas, with the game in Lawrence. From an experience standpoint, ultimately, this is a sales pitch. The chance to play in games like this, the chance to play in environments like this, the chance to play IU Kansas, as opposed to, and I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, IU Butler. I haven't. This is literally nothing against Butler. Ultimately, this is a bigger stage. It is. Now, there's a very real world where Thad Matta gets Butler going. It's not hard to see. And then IU Butler becomes that again. I think that the issue for Indiana, really with the Crossroads Classic from a competitive standpoint, became that, I'm trying to remember, only one of their last 4 or 5 wins in that event was against a team that landed in the Ken Pom top 50. It was incredibly it had become not an ankle weight, but it had become a very mixed bag, whether it was Butler or Notre Dame, in terms of what you were getting out of it from a competitive standpoint. The environment was great. And I think you saw last year, I think Indiana players really enjoyed kind of the environment that game turned into. But I think if you're Indiana, you feel like you can probably do that on your own. You got the Miami game at Cambridge this year. I would be shocked if we don't see Indiana in another big one-off game in Indy at some point in the next 2 or 3 years. Indy will always be there for a school like IU. A trip to Kansas won't be. And so for all those reasons, and again, if there are Butler fans watching, I'm going to get murder in the comments. I know that. I'm not trying to pick on Butler so much as I'm trying to say there's very little out there like Kansas from a competitive standpoint, from an atmosphere standpoint, from an exposure standpoint. And then, hey, listen, if you could find your way to winning this game, which, I wouldn't put it past them, I wouldn't say it's beyond them, then obviously from an NCAA tournament resume value standpoint.
Yeah, and as far as I think the national exposure is just something that they have been wanting for recruiting because, like you mentioned, Butler, while that would be cool, you already have the Purdue in-state rivalry that is never going to go away. So another in-state rival is not something they want, I think, or need to help them. But the return of the Kentucky series, that's something that people are clamoring for, and has a much bigger national view to it, which is what Mike Woodson, I think, wants for his recruiting needs, as we've seen him step away from just recruiting from all over the place, which he will continue to do. But it's just seeing Indiana in these games on this stage in these environments it has been missed for so long, and it is so welcome to see it back. Yeah, they've been in the Big Ten ACC Challenge and all that, but it's these other games. This is a standoff. This Kansas game is a standoff, as opposed to being in the Crossroads Classic, which I think everybody is in agreement that it's just more entertaining, but that's the way that they're going to continue to move that program forward, I think, by playing these type of teams and environments.
Yeah, and I mean, at some level, you have to lose games. I mean, like it should go without saying. Now, it's not like Indiana's failed if it doesn't beat Kansas or Arizona. You know, that's not what I'm suggesting. What I do mean is that if you're going to push yourself to be on these stages more often, you can't turn into the team that always shrinks on them, or the team that goes 1-10 in games like this over a 4-year period or something like that. But I agree with you that I think there has kind of been this attitude, like Indiana has sort of approached these games and thought, let's not go too far, let's not do too much, let's not push ourselves too hard. Let's get one but not two, or let's get ACC Big Ten plus one more but not plus two more. Let's make sure we're always playing the game at home, or we'll only do this if the team will come to Indianapolis, which again, like, teams love to come to Indy. I mean, that's the reason teams are clamoring to play in Indy during the pandemic season. It's because Indy is such a smooth event hosting city. But at the same time, teams will still know that Indiana in Indianapolis is not Gonzaga in Indianapolis, like when Gonzaga and Baylor played there a few years ago. So, you have to be purposeful about getting this kind of game on your schedule. If you're Indiana, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And Arizona's the same way. And I know we're going to see them in New York next year, back in what used to be called the 2K Sports. I think the 2K Sports Invitational. Now I think it's called the Empire Classic. I know we're going to see Kansas come back to Bloomington. You mentioned getting the Kentucky series going again. I also think it's possible we could see Indiana seek out another Vegas-like game in an NBA arena somewhere. A sort of like a one-off against another, pretty good to really good opponent, that kind of thing in the next 2 or 3 years. I think Indiana, no one has said this to me, but Indiana really seemed to enjoy its time in the Bahamas. They play a tournament down there every year. So would Indiana pursue, an opportunity in battle for Atlantis, which is not exclusively Nike, but has tended to, sort of bend more toward Nike in the same way Maui bends more toward Adidas, but you can get in both if you want to be in both. My point in this is you have to be purposeful about it. You can't have situations where you just say, oh, well, we're only going to do the minimum. And then if somebody comes to us with a great opportunity that really makes the most sense for us, we'll take that too. You've got to go to organizers. You've got to go to other teams. You've got to embrace the idea that you play in games like this, and that you want games like this, and that you seek out games like this. And I think you've seen Indiana, certainly over at least the next 2 seasons. When you look at next year and you consider that they're going to play 2 games in New York, they'll have, I presume, something replacing the ACC Big Ten Challenge, and then Kansas at minimum. We're going to see it again next year. This is just what you have to do.
Yeah, Robert mentions the Bank One Big Four Classic back in the 80s. Why wasn't that something of the nature work today? Because I think that everybody wants a more national recruiting footprint. And Indiana already plays Purdue, and people in the state might want to see people play Indiana, or play Notre Dame, but I don't think, and Butler, which is it's cool, but it's not the same as seeing them play Kansas. It's not the same as seeing them play Kentucky. It's not the same as seeing them play these other big time programs. And that's what people want. Not only that, though, that's also, I think it helps build the program back to what it was, keeps your stature and just all of that. My personal opinion on that.
Well, I mean, you mentioned the Big Four Classic. I mean, it takes 4 teams to want that, and it's
it still amuses me the extent to which Indiana gets blamed for the death of the Crossroads Classic. Notre Dame pulled out first. Notre Dame won it out before Indiana did. But when Notre Dame pulled out, Indiana thought, well, there's just no way to make this. We've been exploring other opportunities here for a while, and there's no practical way to make this event what it was without Notre Dame. So we're going to step away too. It just, nothing is permanent in scheduling. Like if you think back, like the Crossroads Classic existed for 11 years. That's a long time. Like that is a long time. For something that was driven completely and totally by the schools. It wasn't organized by the conferences, which obviously have a sort of a broader organizing power. It wasn't organized by a TV partner like the ACC Big Ten Challenge is, that being relevant because the TV partners are the ones that can bring the money to the table. It was organized purely by the schools. And so, when you see Kansas and IU maybe only do a 2-year series, we'll see if it gets extended beyond that, but it wouldn't shock me if it just stays at 2 years. Well, guess what? That's kind of the normal life cycle of something like that. And then maybe they circle back in a few years. Maybe Adidas gets involved and says, you are basically our 2 top basketball properties. Maybe we can pull you into something a little bit more regular. But, the truth is those big events, the Crossroads Classic, et cetera, those things, don't tend to last, 20, 30 years. Everything is constantly refreshing itself in scheduling for a variety of reasons. There's now you've got new TV partners. Like, does it, NBC's got its foot in the door of the Big Ten. Would it like to set up some sort of, national NBC broadcasted event? I don't know, maybe. You've got different players. Like, I heard a rumor a couple years ago, Indiana was going to try and play Auburn. Well, 10, 15 years ago, does anybody really care if Indiana plays Auburn? No. But right now, that's a great game. Right now, that's a program trying to get back into the Final Four and a program that's been really, really good under Bruce Pearl in recent years. So my point is, in scheduling, nothing is ever permanent. And, and that's why I say you've got to be purposeful about getting these games on your schedule, because they don't just come to you. Teams are always sort of changing and flexing and trying to figure out different ways to structure their schedules. Sometimes you got to go to a Kansas, or sometimes you've got to go to an event organizer and say, hey, Arizona's interested. Will you put this together for us? Because it just, there's no sort of just like structure you can just sort of insert yourself into, and it just takes care of itself.